The city was alive with its usual chaos. A symphony of honking horns, hurried footsteps, and the distant hum of conversations blending into the crisp winter air. But for Richard Hayes, the noise faded into a dull murmur as he navigated the streets in his sleek black car. At 58, Richard was a man who had achieved everything society deemed valuable: wealth, success, and influence. Yet, beneath the polished exterior lay a soul burdened by an emptiness that no amount of money could fill. It had been 2 years since the passing of his beloved wife, Emily. Her death had left a void so profound that even time seemed powerless to heal it. Once known for his charm and charisma, Richard now found himself retreating from the world, isolating within the walls of his sprawling estate. The only place he allowed himself to feel anything close to peace was at Emily's grave, a quiet corner of the cemetery where he visited weekly, clutching a single red rose and memories too painful to let go. On this particular evening, however, something unusual caught his attention. As he drove past a dimly lit street corner, his eyes landed on a frail figure huddled against the biting cold. She was wrapped in layers of tattered blankets, her face partially obscured by a scarf worn thin from years of use. A cardboard sign rested beside her, scrawled with shaky handwriting, "Anything helps. God bless." Richard hesitated, his hand hovering over the steering wheel. He'd seen countless individuals like her, people whose lives seemed worlds apart from his own. Part of him wanted to drive on, dismissing the encounter as another fleeting moment in a busy city. But another part, buried deep beneath layers of cynicism and detachment, stirred with a flicker of empathy. He pulled over, earning curious glances from passers-by. Stepping out of the car, he approached the woman cautiously, his leather shoes clicking softly against the pavement. Up close, he noticed the weariness etched into her features. The hollow cheeks, the tired eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a styrofoam cup half filled with coins. "I'm sorry to bother you," Richard said, his voice steady but tinged with unease. "Is there anything I can do to help?" The woman looked up, startled by the unexpected kindness. For a moment, their eyes met, and Richard saw something familiar in her gaze, a mixture of despair and resilience that reminded him of his own struggles after losing Emily. Without thinking, he reached into his wallet and pulled out 3 crisp $100 bills. Handing them to her, he added, "Take care of yourself." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely, her voice cracking under the weight of gratitude. "God bless you." As Richard climbed back into his car, he couldn't shake the image of her face from his mind. It wasn't just her gratitude that lingered. It was the faint recognition in her expression, as though she knew something about him that he didn't yet understand. Little did he know, their paths were destined to cross again in a way that would change his life forever. The next morning dawned gray and frosty, the kind of day that seemed to mirror Richard's somber mood. He rose early, as he always did on Saturdays, dressing in a dark coat and scarf before making his way to the cemetery. Visiting Emily's grave had become a ritual, a chance to speak aloud the thoughts he kept locked inside, to feel, even briefly, as though she might still be listening. As he approached the familiar plot, however, something unusual caught his eye. A figure knelt before Emily's headstone, her back to him. It was the same woman from the night before, the beggar he'd given $300 to. She wore the same tattered clothes, but now she held a small bouquet of wildflowers in one hand, their vibrant colors clashing against the muted tones of the winter landscape. Her shoulders shook slightly, and Richard realized she was crying. He froze, unsure whether to approach or retreat. What was she doing here? How could she possibly know Emily? Questions swirled in his mind as he stood rooted to the spot, watching silently. After a few moments, the woman wiped her tears with trembling hands, placed the flowers gently at the base of the headstone, and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, smoothing it carefully before tucking it beneath the bouquet. Richard's curiosity overpowered his hesitation. Clearing his throat softly, he stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low but firm. The woman turned sharply, startled. Recognition flickered across her face when she saw him, followed by a mix of guilt and apprehension. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, she stood, clutching the edges of her worn jacket as if trying to shield herself from judgment. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just needed to thank her." "Thank her?" Richard echoed, his brow furrowing. "How do you know my wife?" She hesitated, glancing down at the grave as though drawing strength from its presence. "Her name, it's Emily, right? Emily Hayes." At his nod, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "She saved me once, years ago. Without her, I wouldn't be here today." Richard stared at her, stunned. This frail, weathered woman standing before him somehow carried a piece of Emily's story, something he hadn't known existed. His chest tightened as a wave of emotions washed over him. Confusion, disbelief, and a pang of regret for all the parts of Emily's life he'd failed to notice. "Can you tell me more?" he asked finally, his tone softer. "About how you knew her?" The woman nodded, though her eyes remained guarded. "My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. If you have time, I'll explain everything. But not here. Not like this." Richard agreed, offering to take her somewhere warm where they could talk. She hesitated briefly before nodding, following him to a nearby cafe. Over steaming cups of coffee, Maggie began to share her story. "It was almost 10 years ago," she started, her voice steady despite the weight of the memories. "I was living on the streets, addicted to drugs, completely lost. One night, during one of my worst episodes, I collapsed outside a community center where your wife volunteered. She found me there, delirious and half-frozen. Instead of calling the police or walking away, she stayed with me until help arrived." Maggie paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Later, she visited me in rehab, brought books, wrote letters, reminded me that I mattered. She believed in me when no one else did, not even myself. Because of her, I got clean, got a job, started rebuilding my life." Her voice cracked as she added, "But things fell apart again recently. My husband died, I lost my home, and I ended up back where I started. When you gave me that money last night, it felt like maybe she sent you, like she was still looking out for me." Richard listened intently, his heart aching with every word. He'd never known about Emily's secret acts of kindness, the lives she'd touched without ever mentioning them. As Maggie spoke, he realized how much of his wife's compassion had gone unnoticed, hidden behind her quiet humility. When she finished, silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Richard broke it. "Thank you for telling me this," he said sincerely. "I didn't know about any of it, but hearing it makes me see her in a different light. She was an incredible person." Maggie smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with tears. "She was, and she deserves to be remembered, not just for what she did, but for who she was." As they parted ways, Richard returned to the cemetery alone, his thoughts swirling. Kneeling beside Emily's grave, he noticed the note Maggie had left. Carefully unfolding it, he read the simple yet powerful message scrawled inside, "Thank you for saving me." Tears blurred his vision as he traced the words with trembling fingers. In that moment, Richard understood two things. Emily's legacy of kindness lived on through people like Maggie, and it was up to him to ensure it never faded. In the days that followed, Richard couldn't shake the image of Maggie kneeling at Emily's grave or the raw emotion in her voice as she recounted their connection. It was as though a hidden chapter of Emily's life had been revealed, one filled with quiet acts of heroism and boundless compassion. Determined to learn more, he reached out to Maggie again, inviting her to meet for coffee. This time, his questions went deeper, peeling back layers of a story that painted an even fuller picture of the woman he thought he'd known so well. Maggie arrived at the cafe bundled in a coat Richard had bought for her, a small gesture of gratitude for sharing her memories. She seemed more at ease this time, though her eyes still carried the weight of years spent battling hardship. As they settled into their seats, Richard began gently. "You said my wife saved you. Can you tell me more about what she did? About who she was to you?" Maggie nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm mug of tea. Emily didn't just give me money or food, though she did plenty of that too. What she gave me was hope. When I first met her, I was convinced I was worthless. But she refused to let me believe that lie. She described how Emily visited her regularly during her time in rehab, bringing books that sparked her interest in art and poetry. She'd sit with me for hours, talking about everything under the sun. Books, music, dreams we both had. She made me feel like I wasn't alone. Like maybe, just maybe, I could start over. Richard listened intently, marveling at the depth of Emily's involvement in Maggie's recovery. Did she ever talk about why she helped people like you? He asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Maggie hesitated before answering. Once, she told me about her childhood. Her family struggled, they were poor, always moving from place to place. She saw a lot of pain growing up, and it shaped her. She said she wanted to be the person she needed when she was younger, the one who showed up no matter what. The revelation struck Richard like a thunderclap. In all their years together, Emily had rarely spoken of her early life. He knew vaguely that her parents had divorced when she was young and that money had been tight, but she'd never gone into detail. Now, hearing Maggie describe how those experiences fueled Emily's empathy, Richard felt a pang of regret for not asking more questions, for taking her generosity for granted. Was she always like that? He asked quietly. Helping strangers without expecting anything in return? Maggie smiled softly. Always. That's what amazed me most about her. She didn't do it for recognition or praise. To her, it was just natural, like breathing. As Maggie continued speaking, she shared other stories. How Emily organized fundraisers for local shelters, volunteered at soup kitchens every Thanksgiving, and advocated tirelessly for policies to support marginalized communities. Each anecdote painted a portrait of a woman whose kindness knew no bounds, yet whose humility kept her actions largely invisible to those closest to her. She used to say helping others wasn't just about giving them resources, Maggie recalled. It was about reminding them they mattered, that someone cared enough to show up. That's what she did for me. By the end of their conversation, Richard felt overwhelmed. Not by sadness, but by awe. The Emily he'd married was loving, intelligent, and fiercely devoted to him. But the Emily Maggie described was something more. A force of nature, quietly reshaping lives with her compassion and determination. Over the following weeks, Richard sought out others whose paths Emily had crossed. Through Maggie's connections, he met former addicts, single mothers, and struggling students, all of whom credited Emily with turning their lives around. One man, a recovering alcoholic named James, told Richard how Emily had paid for his rehabilitation program when no one else would. Another woman, Maria, tearfully recounted how Emily had mentored her through nursing school, offering advice and encouragement long after graduation. Each story deepened Richard's understanding of his wife's legacy and his own shortcomings. He realized how much of Emily's life had unfolded beyond the confines of their marriage, how many lives she'd touched while he remained oblivious. Yet instead of feeling resentment, he felt inspired. If Emily could leave such an indelible mark on the world, perhaps he could too. One evening, as Richard sat in his study surrounded by notes and photographs of Emily, he came across an old journal of hers. Flipping through its pages, he discovered entries detailing her thoughts and reflections, many of which echoed Maggie's words. "I want to make sure no one feels invisible," Emily had written. "There's so much pain in the world, but also so much beauty. If I can help even one person see that, then I've done my part." Tears welled in Richard's eyes as he closed the journal. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of purpose ignite within him. Emily's light hadn't dimmed with her passing. It burned brightly in the hearts of everyone she'd helped, and now it was his turn to carry that torch forward. Inspired by the stories of Emily's compassion and the profound impact she'd had on so many lives, Richard resolved to honor her legacy in a tangible way. Though grief still lingered, it was now accompanied by a sense of purpose, a drive to channel his wealth and resources into meaningful action. He began small, reaching out to local shelters and organizations dedicated to helping those in need, eager to understand how he could make the greatest difference. His first step was reconnecting with Maggie, who had become a bridge between him and the community Emily once served. Together, they visited a women's shelter where Maggie had stayed during her recovery years ago. The facility was modest but welcoming, staffed by volunteers who worked tirelessly to provide safety and support for survivors of domestic violence. As Richard toured the building, listening to the residents' stories, he saw glimpses of Maggie's past reflected in their eyes, the same mix of pain and resilience. "I want to help," Richard said firmly after meeting with the shelter director. "Tell me what you need." The director hesitated, perhaps unused to such direct offers from someone like Richard. But when he outlined his plans, funding renovations, providing job training programs, and ensuring long-term financial stability, her skepticism gave way to gratitude. Over the next few months, Richard poured his energy into transforming the shelter, equipping it with better facilities and resources while fostering connections with local businesses to create employment opportunities for its residents. Word of his efforts spread quickly, drawing attention not only from beneficiaries but also from former acquaintances who barely recognized the man Richard had become. Friends and colleagues expressed surprise at his sudden involvement in charitable work, but Richard paid little heed to their reactions. What mattered most was the change he saw unfolding before him. Women rebuilding their lives, children finding safe spaces to grow, and communities coming together to uplift one another. Maggie played a pivotal role in this journey, serving as both a guide and a symbol of hope. With Richard's support, she secured stable housing and began working part-time at the shelter, mentoring women who reminded her of her younger self. Her transformation was remarkable. She walked taller, spoke with confidence, and radiated a quiet strength that inspired everyone around her. "Emily saved my life," Maggie told Richard one evening as they reviewed plans for expanding the foundation's reach. "But you're giving me a future. I'll never be able to repay you for that." "You don't owe me anything," Richard replied, his voice steady yet kind. "This isn't about repayment. It's about continuing what Emily started. If I can help even half as many people as she did, then I'll consider it a success." As the foundation grew, so did its impact. Richard established the Emily Hayes Legacy Fund, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting vulnerable populations across the city. The fund focused on 3 key areas: homelessness prevention, addiction recovery programs, and educational scholarships for underprivileged youth. Donations poured in, not just from Richard's personal fortune, but also from grateful individuals whose lives had been touched by Emily or the Foundation's initiatives. One particularly moving moment came when James, the recovering alcoholic Maggie had introduced him to, stood up at a fundraising gala to share his story. "I was lost until Emily found me," James said, his voice trembling with emotion. "She believed in me when no one else did, including myself. And now, thanks to Mr. Hayes and this foundation, I've got a second chance. I'm sober, I've got a job, and I'm finally learning to believe in myself again." The audience erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. For Richard, the moment was bittersweet, a reminder of Emily's absence but also a celebration of her enduring influence. He realized that while he couldn't bring her back, he could keep her spirit alive through acts of kindness and generosity. Beyond the tangible successes, Richard experienced a personal transformation. Helping others filled the void left by Emily's passing, allowing him to heal while keeping her memory close. Conversations with beneficiaries, volunteers, and staff members reignited his passion for life, reminding him of the joy that comes from making a difference. Even his relationships improved. Old friends noticed the warmth and authenticity he now brought to interactions, while new allies praised his dedication to creating positive change. One evening, as Richard sat in his study reviewing reports and testimonials from the Foundation's beneficiaries, he reflected on how far he'd come. Gone was the emotionally distant man who once isolated himself in grief. In his place stood someone driven by love, for Emily, for humanity, and for the belief that even the smallest act of kindness could ripple outward, touching countless lives. He picked up a framed photo of Emily, smiling softly at her image. "You always knew how to light up the world, Em," he whispered. "Now it's my turn to carry the torch." As Richard delved deeper into honoring Emily's legacy, he found himself yearning to understand her fully, to piece together the woman she was beyond their marriage. Through conversations with Maggie and others whose lives she'd touched, fragments of Emily's past emerged, painting a vivid picture of a woman shaped by hardship yet defined by resilience and compassion. One evening, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, Richard stumbled upon a collection of letters and photographs tucked inside a dusty shoebox. The discovery felt serendipitous, as if Emily herself had left these mementos waiting for him to find. Among the items was a faded photograph of a young Emily, no older than 10, standing beside her mother outside a cramped apartment building. Both wore threadbare clothes, but Emily's bright smile outshone their circumstances. On the back of the photo, written in delicate handwriting, were the words, "Even in tough times, we find reasons to laugh." Richard sat cross-legged on the floor, sifting through the contents of the box. There were letters from Emily's teenage years, addressed to an imaginary friend she called Starlight. In one entry, she wrote, "Dear Starlight, Mom lost her job again today, and Dad hasn't been home in weeks. Sometimes I feel like the world is too heavy for me to carry. But then I think about all the people who are hurting worse than I am, and it makes me want to help them someday. Maybe I can be someone's light when they're in the dark. For now, though, I'll keep dreaming." Reading these words, Richard felt a lump rise in his throat. He had always admired Emily's strength, but he never truly understood its roots. Her childhood struggles hadn't hardened her. Instead, they had instilled in her a deep empathy for others. She carried those experiences with her throughout her life, using them as fuel for her acts of kindness. Another letter, dated several years later, revealed how Emily's dreams began taking shape. Written during her college years, it described her volunteer work at a community center for low-income families. "I spent the afternoon teaching kids how to paint," she wrote. "They're so talented, Starlight, just like you always told me I was. One little girl said she wants to be an artist when she grows up. I promised her I'd help her get there, no matter what it takes." These glimpses into Emily's early life helped Richard see her in a new light. She wasn't just the loving wife who shared his successes and supported his ambitions. She was also a fighter, a dreamer, and a beacon of hope for countless individuals. Her compassion wasn't random or incidental. It was the culmination of a lifetime dedicated to lifting others out of darkness. Richard's reflections were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Maggie, holding a small bundle wrapped in tissue paper. "I thought you should have this," she said softly, handing it to him. Inside was a handmade quilt, a patchwork of vibrant fabrics stitched together with care. "This was Emily's," Maggie explained. "She gave it to me when I first moved into my own place after rehab. Said it was meant to remind me that even broken pieces can come together to create something beautiful." Tears welled in Richard's eyes as he ran his fingers over the intricate patterns. Each stitch seemed to tell a story, not just of Emily's creativity, but of her ability to weave beauty and purpose into everything she did. Over the following weeks, Richard continued uncovering details about Emily's life through flashbacks and memories shared by those who knew her best. He learned about the annual Thanksgiving dinners she hosted for neighbors in need, the late-night phone calls she made to check on struggling friends, and the scholarships she funded anonymously for students pursuing careers in social work. These acts, though seemingly small, added up to a life lived with extraordinary intentionality. One particularly poignant memory came from Maria, the nurse Emily had mentored. She once told me, "The greatest gift we can give isn't money or resources. It's our time," Maria recalled. "When you show up for someone, you're telling them they matter. And everyone deserves to feel like they matter." Hearing these stories reinforced Richard's commitment to continuing Emily's work. He realized that her legacy wasn't confined to grand gestures or monumental achievements. It was woven into the everyday moments of connection and care. Whether it was sitting with a stranger in pain, advocating for policy changes, or simply listening without judgment, Emily had mastered the art of being present. In his quiet moments, Richard often imagined what Emily might say if she could see him now. Would she approve of the foundation? Would she smile at the way he'd embraced her vision of a better world? He liked to think she would, and that somewhere, somehow, she was watching over him. As he placed the quilt on his bed and turned off the attic light, Richard felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for Emily's love, but for the lessons she'd taught him about living with purpose. Her light may have dimmed in the physical world, but it burned brighter than ever in the hearts of those she'd touched, including his own. The Emily Hayes Legacy Fund grew rapidly, transforming from a small initiative into a cornerstone of hope for countless individuals across the city. Richard poured his heart and resources into expanding its reach, ensuring that Emily's compassion would continue to ripple outward long after her passing. What started as a personal mission became a movement, inspiring others to join in creating lasting change. One of the foundation's most impactful projects was the establishment of Hope House, a state-of-the-art facility designed to support families transitioning out of homelessness. Located near the heart of the city, Hope House offered not only temporary housing but also comprehensive programs aimed at rebuilding lives. Residents received job training, mental health counseling, childcare services, and educational workshops, all tailored to help them achieve self-sufficiency. Maggie played a central role in shaping Hope House, drawing on her own experiences to ensure it met the needs of those it served. She worked closely with Richard, offering insights that only someone who had lived through similar struggles could provide. Her presence brought authenticity and trust to the project, reassuring residents that they weren't alone in their journey. "I never imagined I'd end up here," Maggie confessed one afternoon as she and Richard toured the newly completed building. "Helping people the way Emily helped me. It feels like coming full circle." Richard smiled warmly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've come so far, Maggie. And because of you, this place will be more than just walls and beds. It'll be a home, a starting point for new beginnings." Hope House opened its doors to widespread acclaim, quickly becoming a beacon of hope for marginalized communities. Families moved in with nothing but determination and left months later with jobs, stability, and renewed confidence. Success stories poured in: a single mother who secured employment as a nurse, a formerly incarcerated man who launched a small business, teenagers excelling in school thanks to tutoring programs funded by the foundation. Each story was a testament to Emily's enduring influence and Richard's unwavering commitment to honoring her memory. Beyond Hope House, the foundation expanded its efforts to address systemic issues contributing to poverty and inequality. Richard partnered with local schools to establish scholarships for underprivileged students, ensuring access to quality education regardless of financial background. He collaborated with addiction recovery centers to fund innovative treatment programs, emphasizing holistic approaches that addressed both physical and emotional well-being. And he advocated for policy reforms aimed at increasing affordable housing and healthcare accessibility, using his wealth and connections to amplify voices often ignored by those in power. The ripple effect of these initiatives extended far beyond individual beneficiaries. Entire neighborhoods began experiencing positive shifts as families regained stability and contributed to their communities. Local businesses thrived thanks to increased consumer spending, while volunteer networks strengthened as more people stepped forward to lend a hand. The foundation's work proved that kindness wasn't just an act. It was a catalyst for transformation. For Richard, the journey was deeply personal. Each success story reminded him of Emily's quiet strength and boundless generosity. He found solace in knowing that her love continued to touch lives, even if she wasn't physically present to witness it. At times, he felt her spirit guiding him, urging him to keep pushing forward despite challenges or setbacks. One such challenge arose when the foundation faced criticism from skeptics questioning Richard's motives. Some accused him of seeking redemption for past mistakes, while others dismissed his efforts as mere philanthropic posturing. But Richard refused to let negativity deter him. Instead, he invited critics to visit Hope House, meet the residents, and see firsthand the tangible impact of the foundation's work. More often than not, skeptics left converted, moved by the resilience of the individuals they encountered and the sincerity of Richard's mission. As the years passed, Richard formed unexpected bonds with people whose lives were transformed by the foundation. He attended graduations, celebrated milestones, and shared meals with families who once stood on the brink of despair. These interactions reminded him of the profound interconnectedness of humanity, a lesson Emily had embodied throughout her life. One particularly poignant moment occurred during the 5th anniversary celebration of the Emily Hayes Legacy Fund. Hundreds gathered at a community center decorated with photos, testimonials, and artwork created by beneficiaries. James, the recovering alcoholic who had spoken at the gala years earlier, delivered a heartfelt speech reflecting on how far he'd come since meeting Richard. "When I think about where I was 5 years ago, I can barely believe it's the same life," James said, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "But none of this would have been possible without Mr. Hayes, or without Emily, whose spirit lives on in everything he does. She taught us that even in our darkest moments, there's light waiting to guide us. And Richard, he's kept that light burning bright." The crowd erupted in applause, many rising to their feet in gratitude. As Richard looked around the room, at the smiling faces of strangers turned family, he felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. The emptiness that once consumed him had been replaced by purpose, connection, and love. Later that evening, as fireworks lit up the night sky, Richard stood alone for a moment, gazing at the stars. He thought about Emily, imagining her watching over the festivities with pride. In his mind, he whispered a silent thank you, not just for the life they'd shared, but for the legacy she'd entrusted him to carry forward. On the 2nd anniversary of Emily's passing since founding the Legacy Fund, Richard returned to her grave, a place that had once been a sanctuary for his grief, but now symbolized renewal and gratitude. This time he wasn't alone. Maggie, James, Maria, and several others whose lives had been transformed by the foundation accompanied him, each carrying flowers or small tokens to honor Emily's memory. Together, they formed a quiet procession, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath them. As they reached the headstone, Richard paused, taking in the familiar engraving, "Emily Hayes, a light that never fades." Beneath it lay fresh bouquets left by visitors over the years, alongside handwritten notes expressing thanks and admiration. The sight filled him with a bittersweet mix of emotions. Sadness for what he'd lost, but joy for all she'd given. Maggie stepped forward first, placing a bouquet of wildflowers at the base of the grave. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice steady yet thick with emotion, "for believing in me when no one else did." Others followed suit, sharing brief words of gratitude before stepping back. James knelt briefly, setting down a framed photo of himself standing proudly outside his new business, a testament to how far he'd come. Maria placed a single rose, murmuring, "You saved my dreams, Emily. I'll never forget that." When it was Richard's turn, he lingered, tracing the engraved letters with trembling fingers. He held a single red rose, the same kind he'd brought every week during those early days of mourning. But this time it carried a different meaning. It wasn't just an offering of remembrance. It was a promise to continue honoring her legacy. "You were always my inspiration, Em," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. "I'll keep your light shining, for everyone who needs it." The group stood silently for a moment, united in their shared reverence for Emily's life and work. Then, as if guided by an unspoken cue, they began to disperse, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts. He sat on a nearby bench, watching the sunlight filter through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the cemetery grounds. For the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. Reflecting on the journey that had brought him here, Richard realized how much he'd changed, not just outwardly, but within. Grief had once consumed him, isolating him from the world and clouding his ability to see beyond his pain. But through Emily's legacy, he discovered a path toward healing, one paved with compassion, connection, and purpose. He thought about the countless individuals whose lives had intersected with Emily's, either directly or indirectly. Each story was unique, yet they all shared a common thread: the transformative power of kindness. Whether it was Maggie finding stability, James rebuilding his life, or Maria pursuing her dream career, Emily's influence had sparked chains of positive change that continued to grow. Richard also reflected on his own growth. In helping others, He'd rediscovered parts of himself he thought were lost forever. His capacity for empathy, his desire to connect, and his belief in the inherent goodness of humanity. He'd learned that while loss could leave scars, it could also create space for new beginnings. By embracing Emily's values and dedicating himself to her mission, he'd found a way to keep her alive, not just in memories, but in actions that touched countless lives. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the horizon in hues of orange and pink, Richard rose from the bench and approached the grave one last time. Placing the rose gently beside the other tributes, he whispered, "Thank you, Em, for everything." Walking away, he felt lighter, freer than he had in years. The weight of his grief hadn't disappeared entirely, nor should it. It was part of him, woven into the fabric of his love for Emily. But now it coexisted with something else, hope. Hope that her legacy would endure, carried forward not just by him, but by everyone she'd inspired along the way. Back at home, Richard opened the journal he'd started shortly after launching the foundation. On the final page, he wrote, "Emily taught me that kindness isn't finite, it multiplies. One act can spark another, creating ripples that reach farther than we ever imagined. Though she's gone, her light continues to shine through the lives she touched, including mine. And so, I will carry her torch, ensuring that her compassion lives on in every corner of the world." Closing the journal, Richard gazed out the window at the stars beginning to twinkle in the night sky. Somewhere among them, he liked to think Emily was smiling down, proud of the man he'd become, and the difference they'd made together.